Great, thanks, Chloe. Evening, everyone, and thanks for joining. In conversation with Surrey FA, we spoke a little bit about having and wanting to kind of speak a little bit about women's football, whether grassroots football, RTC, and academy football, and just to give everyone on the call a little bit of a better insight into what that actually is and what that entails. And then to give a little bit of an understanding with one of our players. So there's one of our players on the call, and I'll introduce her in a moment, who will also answer some questions related to that pathway and what that actually has looked like for her over a number of years, whether our club, another club, or also grassroots football. So we're hoping to give everyone, like I mentioned, a really good insight into our programme and to what that journey may look like. So who are we? So just as a bit of an introduction to the three of us that are on the call, which is always helpful. So as myself, Dean Stenninger, my role at the club at this moment in time is head of RTC and WSLA, so academy, and also an under-18 coach. We've got Leanne Champ on the call, who's the first team opposition analyst, and is also an under-18 coach. And then we have Amelie, who I mentioned a moment ago, who is one of our current under-18 players. And we'll hear from both of them in a little while. So just to give a bit of an overview, really, for those of you who are unsure, and also just to clear up maybe a couple of questions around what an RTC actually is. And at our football club, we tend to call it academy, so the women's academy. However, we have with the FA, which is an FA-founded programme, it's actually called a regional talent club. And as you can see there, the purpose of that and this club is to identify and support development of all elite female players within a technical and educational programme in order to enable them to fulfil their sporting potential. And as a result, all WSL clubs now actually have to have an RTC and also fulfil an academy programme of some sort alongside whether they're women's first team, but also potentially the charitable arm of the football club in the foundation. So we are one of those. And as a result, one of the things that we discussed as a programme and as a football club and what we wanted to create was that. So to try and really... Can everyone else that's not on mute go on mute, please? That'd be really helpful to support the feedback. That'd be great. So yeah, just around what we actually are wanting to do as a football club and as a programme is to create the world's leading women's academy, both on and off the pitch. And I'll come on a little bit later as to what that may entail and the access to some of the things that these players get that are in our current programme. What would the process be then? Well, to create and provide unique opportunities and exposures for players throughout the whole development pathway that they're a part of. And as a result, the idea is that the product at the end of it will be to produce elite female football players that not only play for Chelsea women to compete in the WSL and obviously Champions League competition, to which our women's first team are obviously taking place a semi-final this coming weekend, but also to create football players to play across the pathway. Yes, first and foremost for our own club, but there's been a number of players that have left our academy programme that we now play against week in, week out for other clubs within WSL, which is something we're extremely delighted about. So as a result, this is kind of a picture, and we always say a picture speaks 1,000 words, and probably will be with the way in which I'll carry on and talk about this. So please bear with me. But we broke our programme down into three parts, much like a lot of boys' academies have done in the past, and what a lot of women's academy programmes will continue to do going forward. So as you can see down here, and I hope you can see my cursor, is that we have a foundation development programme, and what that entails is our under-10s to under-12s players, our youth development programme or phase, which is our under-14 to under-16 players, and then our professional development phase, which is our basically 18-year-olds and above, going into our first team, which of course we always talk about here as becoming potential winners, both on and off the pitch. And again, I'll talk about that in a moment. So what does the programme entail? Well, there's obviously some training and a lot of it. So at this age group, foundation phase, they have 2 training sessions a week and a game. At the youth development phase, they have 3 training sessions a week and a game. And at the professional development phase, they have 3 to 4 training sessions a week and a game. And they'll play in different fixture programs against the likes of other WSL academies. As an example, we travelled to Everton last week, Man United a few weeks ago. So it's a real nationwide program. At the YDP phase, the youth development phase, they'll play against, again, other RTC programs, but more regionalised. So Arsenal's, Tottenham's, West Ham's, Brighton's, Southampton's, Reading's, as an example. And then obviously at this phase, the foundation development phase, they actually partake in grassroots boys leagues, and a local one at that, which they tend to really, really enjoy. And also we get a huge amount of success from. So that's kind of our training program. From a performance perspective, all players will be this, and what that entail is some expert analysis, some expert support around sleep, menstrual cycle, nutrition, off-pitch related, academic work related to their performance. So links here so they get their own huddle account where they're able to watch their sessions back, their games back, and analyze that with the coaching staff. And that's what we would really determine performance as, in order to try and enhance that and get them that step closer to becoming a professional football player. I mentioned and touched upon analysis there. So again, at this age group, they'll obviously have a lot more of that, and they'll have some team workshops. And obviously that will slowly decrease throughout the age group, through the age groups, as we get down to under 10, or increase as we get to under 18 and towards first team, as you'd imagine. There's some medical provision. Every training session, there will be a doctor on site, a physio. They get their own physiotherapist to support them if there's any injuries or little niggles, etc. And as a result, obviously, the program is able to really make sure that it's a safe space, as well as one where we're really pushing for high performance. We mentioned movement a little bit earlier, again, related to performance. So strength and conditioning program, a prehab program, and every player from the age of 10 all the way through to our first team will receive that. And of course, it will become a little bit more specific, a lot more bespoke, and a lot more intense. The older that you get as a younger age player, it will be very much based around the basic movements in order to support them to become good football players, and towards becoming good people and understanding other sports. And it will actually sometimes involve other sports. So it might involve us playing basketball one night a week, as an example. And again, that's part of our program. And then a really huge part of our program is around that education. And I mentioned the football education with analysis, the different workshops around sleep, nutrition, menstrual cycle, but also that academic education, allowing the players to work closely with their school or college to make sure that we give them enough time to go and do those things, to still succeed in those things, and that we actually support and work collaboratively with the institution that they attend. And there, I did mention earlier that a picture speaks 1,000 words, and that really is what this is aiming to do. And ultimately, what we want to try and do, and whatever point, if a player was to drop out of our program and go to another one for whatever reason, or continue all the way through from 10 through to first team, or join at an older age group, is that ultimately we want them to try and sign professional contracts. That's what they're attending our program for, and also to become a winner. And I mentioned earlier around, obviously, for our football club, but also to succeed in becoming a professional football player at WSL level is something that we're extremely proud of. So that's kind of our program. To give those who are unaware a little bit around the football pyramid in the women's department, just to give everyone a bit more context, our first team currently sit within the Women's Super League, and a few questions, and I'm sure will probably be part of this, is around where our academy sits, and it kind of sits in between the Women's National League Premier and the Women's Championship. And I say that loosely as a result of the fact that whilst they don't compete directly against each other, we've had numerous friendlies, numerous games at this level where we've done extremely well, some where we haven't done so well as a result, or from the result in terms of the outcome of the games, and against these teams as well, where we tend to be a little bit stronger for. And on top of that, every player that has left our program in the last 2 years has gone on to either play at either Championship, WSL, or gone to America. Not one of them has fallen below this sort of level. So we kind of pitch our academy program under 18s in and around this level of the football pyramid. just to give a little bit of more context around that then, so some stereotypical pathways, and I felt it was really important to talk about these, and I've chosen 3 clubs, obviously us being one of those that are in the WSL, London Bees obviously currently in the Championship, and Maidenhead United obviously as part of the Grassroots programme. And I've broken it down into how we spoke earlier around the different phases, this being below foundation development phase as a whole, and then professional development phase up here. And you can kind of talk a little bit here around what the entry level may look like. And of course, before academy or an RTC, you'd see some foundation pathways and some grassroots teams. The minute you go into development football, a club such as ours at this moment in time will have an RTC and an academy, like I mentioned previously. Those outside of that will have foundation pathways or grassroots teams that compete as a result. You then have what we would have is a WSL academy. London Bees, for example, would have a development squad, and a Maidenhead United would have a college programme, or be associated to one of those. And of course, then you'd have women's first team across the 3 different clubs. So it kind of gives you a little bit of context around where everyone sits around that, and how it does differ within a club programme such as ours. Quite a lot of questions around the trial process and what that looks like within our RTC, and so I felt again it appropriate to kind of touch upon this. We do have open trials, and obviously last year we were unable to run those due to obvious reasons. What has been probably quite a difficult year, and as a result, recruitment remained very much around retention of the players that were in our programme. And of course, we'll continue to do that. We as a football club at RTC and academy level actually have one of the highest retention rates of our football players across the different age groups currently, and I think it's something we're really, really proud of. But of course, we are always looking for new talent that's out there that's able to come and trial within our programme. We do have open trials, like I mentioned a minute ago, this year. They'll be held on the weekend of June the 5th and 6th, and 12th and 13th. And when you look to sign up, which is part of this link, and I'll ask Chloe to send the slides out later, you'll be able to access that. And of course, the relevant weekend or date will be dependent on what age group your daughter is applying for, or a player within your team is going to apply for if they'd like to. And I think the last thing to just mention around that is that it's really important to note that we cannot accommodate all applications. Not last year, the year before, we had over 1,000. And if we're looking for a very minute number of places per age group, and by that we'd probably predominantly be looking at no more than 3 to 4 per age group every year. To have 1,000 places for four or 5 age groups, you can imagine is quite a difficult one, and unfortunately we're unable to accommodate it, certainly this year again, and we have to be therefore relatively selective around that, which is a difficult thing and a frustration, but something that we're willing to work towards going forwards with our foundation programme, which again I can give some more context and content around in the future. I'm going to kind of now hand over to Leanne and Amelie, just to kind of, Leanne's devised a few questions that she'd like to ask Amelie, just to give you guys on the call again a little bit more context around what the pathway's been like for a player in her eyes. And so I'll hand over to them, and then we'll come back for some more questions around the whole programme or for Amelie specifically. Leanne, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Dean. Hi everyone, and welcome. And for the girls on the call, I hope you're enjoying being back on the pitch and playing. I know it's been a long time, so yeah, but I hope you're having fun. So yeah, like Dean just said, we're going to talk with Amelie. She's one of our under 18 players. Has been in the RTC programme as well. It's her 3rd year with us. Okay, so Amelie, are you on the call?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yes, just making sure. Amelie, I've only got 45 questions for you. I'm only joking. Okay, so just the first question, Anne. So in terms of your football journey, when and how did that begin?
So I first started in the playground at primary school with the boys. Always be the kid to take them out if I could. And then I joined a grassroots club from the age of 5. And then I played boys football all the way until 13. I did play some girls football in between with Sutton United. I joined Wimbledon at one stage, but generally from a young age I stayed up with the boys.
And how was that with the boys?
I enjoyed it. I always liked when he turned up to a game, they'd always like point out that I was a girl. And at that point, you had to prove the point and make sure you were known.
That's it. So in terms of the RTC programme, when did you first get involved?
So I joined Millwall RTC, my first academy, when I was 13. I actually originally trialled in the summer, I think Millwall, Brighton and a couple of others, and didn't get into any. And then midway through my Wimbledon season, one of my previous coaches pointed me out and I went on trial for Millwall at 6 weeks. And then after 2 years, I made the decision to join Chelsea. Went to the trials, had a really positive experience. I found the girls were probably one of the most friendly I've had at a trial. Made me feel welcome, and then it ended up being successful, and I've been there ever since.
Okay, so this is your third season now, isn't it? I think, is that right?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so that's really good. So you've experienced from playing with the boys, being in Grassroots, being at different RTC clubs, and now being at Chelsea. So you've experienced all of that. So really good. And what would be your highlights so far? Being at Chelsea, been with us for 3 years. What would be the highlights to date so far?
One of them's got to be Paris 2019, with the opportunity to go to Paris at the weekend, play at the PSG training ground. Obviously, we've interacted with first team players on Zoom calls, got to have Q&As and stuff. Worked with some excellent coaches.
Let's get that one in.
And obviously develop as a player and as a person as well off the pitch.
Okay, really good. And would you say, during your time, at Chelsea, have there only been, or even prior to that, have there been any challenges along the way in terms of your career so far?
I think playing in an academy, obviously it's like a high pressure environment all the time. You've got to be focused. And I think sometimes that's difficult because when you're 16, I feel like I've always got to show up and be my best, because at the end of the day, it's such a competitive sport. Another thing is in being injured. I found that really tough this season. I felt I was losing out on development time. And then obviously I think the one for everyone's COVID. I think having your season cut short, FA Cup final ruined, and having to work on your own for months was horrible.
Yeah, it's certainly been a challenging year, and I think everyone copes with it differently. But in terms of, and how do you balance it all? How do you balance football and be socialising, education, because it's important, a year in terms of education, exams. How do you balance all that?
I'm not gonna lie, it's really difficult, but I think once you know like where your balance is and find out the right thing, I think you always miss out on things with friends on Friday nights, Saturday nights. You've got a game the next day and you've been asked to go out, and it's making the right decisions. And I think we've got games on Wednesdays this year, and I know some of the girls are lucky enough to have Wednesdays completely off, but unfortunately I miss lessons. So it's making sure you catch up on them, stay on top of them at the time you get, so your work doesn't pile up and become too big. But obviously it's difficult.
Yeah, but you feel you're okay about balancing that? Yes, something you can do.
I've definitely got better as I've got older. I've seen schoolwork is important.
Yeah, no, of course. And what would you say is the best part of being part of Chelsea Academy RTC programme?
I think the opportunity to develop as a player and at a high standard every week in such a positive environment. It doesn't get, for me, comparing like Millwall and Chelsea, of course, Millwall was what I needed, but the big difference is the professionalism between the two. But it's still enjoyable because we're still very young.
Really good. And then lastly, what are your aspirations in football? What do you want to achieve in the game? What do you aspire to?
Be a professional footballer and play for England seniors.
Yeah, good aspirations. Okay, so some really good answers there, and I hope that's given everyone, it's been insightful, and just to see, someone who's come from, grassroots all the way through, and the different experiences, different challenges as well. So really good answers, Amelie. Thank you for that. Chloe, we're going over to you. Was it back to Dean? Not too sure.
Chloe, I'm happy. The next slide was just around Q&A, really. So we can probably take the slides down and answer any questions that anyone has, if that's all right. And thanks again, Amelie, for providing your feedback there about the journey.
Yeah, fab. Thanks again, to Amelie fantastic to hear from a player's perspective. I've got various sets of questions that have come in on the booking form. I think we've probably touched upon a couple in terms of the trial process, as you said, Dean. But I think I will start with pick and choose. What are the typical progressions? So you've obviously mentioned the American pathway and stuff. Is that the most common sort of pathway? This person's used WSLA, reserves, development, and there's also a question around whether WSLA or a development team, which is the higher level of girls football. I don't know if you've got stuff to add to that.
Yeah, no, good question. I think to answer the first one around typical sort of exit routes, I think America used to be, for sure. The statistics of those that went to America from England of a high standard to go out to America to learn, to be offered a scholarship academically, which is a fantastic offer. But from a football perspective, I think it's started to reduce in the number of players that have been leaving our country to go there, for sure. Yes, there's been some success stories, but there's also been an awful lot of players that maybe haven't achieved the success that they were hoping to do over there. So we're starting to see less and less of that now. And I think also as a result, clubs such as ours, and I'll talk on behalf of ours only, is that the provision that we're trying to offer now educationally, whilst we might not be able to compete with certain things that America can do from a scholarship and a payment perspective, from a football perspective is a far higher level. In terms of academy and development squad, I think it'd be fair to say that academies, under 18, under 21s within a club environment are a higher standard than a development team for another club. They're much the same, but the academy league is held in higher regard within the women's game. I think I've answered both of your questions. Yeah,
fab. I will stay as well. Any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box as we're going on. I will come to those as well. The next one I've got is, and there's been a couple of questions with specific mention actually to goalkeepers a couple of times, but sort of what qualities and skills do RTCs look at in the trial process? Is there anything in particular that coaches are on the lookout for?
Yeah, I think actually the answer, to be honest, I won't just talk about goalkeepers. I'll talk about football players. And what I would add to that is that we have a very high set of standards but very simple set of KPIs per position for a player at each different age group. And Amelie will obviously know a lot about that in relation to her IAP program that she goes through, which is effectively for her position, what she should be doing in possession, what she should be looking to do out of possession, and at a detailed level. And when we go through a trial program, and I only talk on behalf of our club, but when we go through a trial program, we will mark players against that criteria, and also against our set of principles of how we like to play the game of football, which is set very much by our first team. So it can become quite detailed. But as a result, what we do is we start to get a specific understanding of where a player may fit. And also what you tend to do is that, you see on the trial process or application that someone puts down that they're a right winger, but actually they have all the attributes of what one of our right backs may need to look like. And I think that's really, really interesting, and certainly something that I would encourage across all of grassroots football, and for those that are on the call involved in that, not to pigeonhole your players in relation to that, because they may get to a first team opportunity and not be picked in the position that they thought that they were. And just to give a really quick example of that is that we've had a player leave our academy program in our first team and training with our first team, playing in a completely different position to where she played even at under 18 within our program. And the fact of the matter is that she ticked the criteria for that age group for them in a different position to what it was in ours. And I think so that's why we tend to look at those as our key measures when we look at the players.
Fab. This is what is the best way for grassroots teams to promote players that show ability to RTC clubs, or how can grassroots clubs best help players that are showing potential?
It's a great question, and I think it's a fantastic question, because I think only a few years ago that question wouldn't have been asked. I think that's a very fair comment, and therefore the question's outstanding. I think to get in contact, we don't have the resources that boys' academies have in terms of scouting and this, that, and the other, and so the coaching environment, or the coaches connect, if you like, is that. And so if you feel you have a player within your environment that is an extremely high standard, a standard that's ahead of Grassroots, and you want to afford them the opportunity to whether go and trial or be part of a program which can offer all of that Amelie mentioned and that I spoke a little bit about, then just get in contact, and Chloe will have my contact details and a few others related to the academy program that you can reach out to, and whether that's us coming to watch or a trial program related to our FDC within our foundation, or even within our RTC and our academy.
Marcus in the chat box was actually asked a relatively similar question. Do you have any advice for players outside of the RTCs in terms of keeping up? I think that's trying. And realistically, is there a stage that's too late to get into an RTC?
Again, a really good question, and I think this is part of the problem across all football, not just in women's football necessarily, but we talk about bridging the gap even with our players who have 4 training sessions a week and a game to our first team, especially when they buy world-class football players from around the world, as you've started to see, and now competing at a really high level across Europe. But also at the other end of that, around players that maybe haven't been part of an academy program yet, but are now competing against players that are in an academy program, training 3 times a week, whilst they're just training once a week and go and play a game at the weekend. How do we bridge that gap? And I would always say is that it's really important to manage your weekly loading. So sometimes less is more. And I know that sounds really controversial, contradictory to what I was just saying, but make sure what it is that you do is of a high quality. Firstly, do you enjoy it? So if you're a grassroots club, are you enjoying things? Fantastic. Be there with your mates, because the likelihood is you're then able to perform at the higher standard. 2, can you find yourself some opportunities to go and train elsewhere? And whether that's with a foundation development centre, like a Chelsea version of that, another club version of that, local development centre programme with boys, etc., I think would also be a good thing. But just because you do things 5 times a week doesn't mean that you're going to bridge that gap. So make sure what you're doing is quality and you're enjoying it, and then hopefully there'll be an opportunity to bridge that gap in the future. And the FA and the football clubs such as ours will think of other innovative ways in order to do that as well.
Fab. Got a couple more coming in now. Albert, I'm going to ask your question, but feel free to jump in and explain further if you want to. How does the Wednesday night training at ACS in Esher fit into the development pathway at Chelsea?
So the Foundation Development Centre at ACS Common currently, that was at the training ground, that's now on a Wednesday. It used to be a Tuesday. So basically we have conversations with our foundation team and the head of that program, and particularly in around this time of year coming up to the trials, we'll start to ask questions around players that have been doing well in that program, that are standing out in that program, that they believe should be relevant to put forward for a trial. I'll 9 times out of 10 ask for quite a few names per age group to do so, in order so that when we get their application, we make sure that they've been accepted as part of a trial process. Obviously, without COVID, we've not been able to get down to a lot of those training sessions, being in a tested bubble, etc. But now things are starting to relax. We're hopeful that 1 or 2 staff members can also go down to those types of sessions and again try to bridge that link, at least to start seeing that a little bit more apparently. And the last thing I would add to that is just that we, over the last few years, have had quite a few players that have come through that Foundation Development Centre into our RTC programme, predominantly in the younger age groups, yes. But we've also had 1 or 2 from the age of 12 and 14 that have also come into our programme from that Foundation Development Centre.
Fab. Stevie's after some coaching advice. Any tips on moving to 9-a-side with the introduction of offside?
Leanne, Leanne, do you want to answer that one?
Sorry, can you say that again? Sorry.
Yeah, that's all good. Any tips on moving to essentially a game that now has offside in? So 9-a-side football for youth players. Any sort of sessions you might think would be worthwhile in terms of getting used to the offside rule?
Yeah, we can send some. We can send some over, if that would help. And we can send them over to you, and you can have access to them.
Fab. I'll send those on to you, Stevie.
That'd be great. Thank you.
No worries.
Another question from Kate. What's your advice for a player transitioning from US to UK to assess potential fit in terms of skills level?
Can you say that again, Chloe? Sorry.
What's your advice for a player transitioning from US to UK to assess potential fit in terms of skills level?
Yeah, again, I'll probably go back to the point. It depends very much on the club specific KPIs or per position. I think it's really going to be quite a difficult thing. And we are quite well aware of a lot of the top players out in America. And I'm sure that other football clubs are too. And so just a conversation with someone probably offline, maybe not in this environment. Again, happy to have that conversation with whoever asked that question in order to understand where they're currently at and what that kind of looks like. But it is a very different type of game, let me tell you.
Fab. From Darren, are there any plans to run teams at every age instead of 10s, 12s, etc.? How does the system work the way it is at present at Chelsea?
A really good question, and unfortunately it's something that we've been asked to do, to be honest with you, with the FA. And so the way the FA has structured the programme has been over 2-year age banding, and actually as a result there's been some real benefits to that. So those that are in the second year are really supporting those in their first year of each age band, and therefore stretching their development to a level which has been really supportive. Over the next 3 to 4 years, there's actually something that's just come out from the FA where that's going to change, and they will actually move to single year age bands from 14s and above. So from 2024-25, there will be an under 14, under 15, under 16 programme up to under 18. So that will start to change. Obviously, the frustrations around that is the onus on the clubs to run them out, those amount of age groups, and the amount of money that it also costs. And unfortunately, I hate to go back to money, but it's true. So in order to make sure that we are able to fund those programs efficiently, effectively, in order to create the quality that we've been able to do over the last 2 to 3 years within the program and the changes that we've made. So, but that's something that the FA have decided, and something that we're looking to support. And whether that's the case, and we can work with our foundation with younger age groups, that's all in the planning at this current stage. But yes, the plan is from 14s and above to be single year age bands by 2024-25.
Fab. And a couple more from Marcus. Are the foundation centres invite only? And if so, what are the routes to access them? I'll ask the second one after you've done that one.
Yeah, so the majority of them are. We have a PDC, though, a player development centre, which is open to anybody. So normally the route through that in terms of and of course, we have to have a filtered system in order to make sure that we don't dilute or exceed the qualities within each banding of that. So the typical route would be to attend a PDC, soccer school, and after-school club within our foundation programme. They then be put forward for a foundation development centre, which, as you mentioned, is invite only, in order to make sure we can manage the quality within that programme. And then, of course, you'd also have to be offered a position to trial or offered a 1-year registration within our RTC and our academy programme.
Fab. And then the next one is regarding the player/age KPIs. Can you give some insight into the balance between technical and other characteristics?
Yeah, so we would work, and I know everyone obviously, hopefully on the call, would be familiar with the 4-corner model. We work slightly differently around that, but also entwined in that you could talk about the psychological pathway, the physical elements of certain things, the decision making around a lot of those things per position. So, for example, Amelie, would you want to share what your IAPs are currently, and then we can talk about what that would look like from a player's position? So maybe start with what position you play, and then talk about your IAPs.
Okay, so I play centre mid usually more on the defensive side. Times I have played centre back this year. My IAPs currently are around decision making. So what I do when I get the ball, scanning, communication, so coaching through the phases, and they're my main three at the moment because we've just changed them.
Good. And so when we talk a little bit about your position, we talk about decision, the decision making around, what did you mention your decision making one was?
Decision making of whether I'm retaining possession for the team or whether I feel we need to go forward to get on the counter. So more around like controlling the tempo of the game. Brilliant.
So, for example, someone that plays in central midfield, that decision making around when to play forward, when not to, and just retain possession may look slightly different for someone who is a higher importance than someone that maybe plays at fullback, for example. But it also might be very similar to someone that plays at centre half or centre back. So there's some similarities per position, but I think hopefully that's given you a really good indication of someone who plays in central midfield and an IAP that's related to that. And of course, that one really links to, on the four corner model, that psych piece that we continue to talk about regularly, which is 9 times out of 10 underlooked, by the way. Thanks, Amelie. That was good.
Fab. Thank you. There's nothing more in the chat box at the moment. If anyone's got anything else that pops up, please do let us know. Just having a scan through the ones that were sent in terms of whether we've sort of roughly covered everything. We've covered the player age groups. I think, to be fair, we've done a fairly good job of covering those as well. So if there's anything else, Georgia, perfect timing. Does playing in the US on a soccer scholarship lead into playing professional in the UK?
Yeah, I think we kind of spoke a little bit about that earlier, that there has been 1 or 2 really successful people that have done that have come back to this country and done really well, and they're currently playing in WSL. We talk about Alessia Russo, who was at our club that went to do that. We can talk about Lottie Woden-Moy, who's now obviously at Arsenal, went out there to come back, which are great, and they're great examples of that. There's also a substantial amount of players that have gone out there that have come back and aren't, unfortunately, at the level to play at WSL or even Championship. So it very much depends on what that scholarship looks like. Whilst it does support academic qualifications for sure, and aspirations, absolutely. It typically, I would say, falls short compared to those that stay in this country, continue to educate themselves within universities in this country through grants, through funding, through the football club, and that play at a higher level alongside their education.
Fab. A couple more coming in. So Darren says, sorry, I may have missed your answer on the 4 corner model, but you said yours differed slightly. How does it differ?
Yeah. So without going into too much detail, we follow a slightly different model around the way in which we deliver football training or football coaching. We deliver it through communication, decision making, execution, and we within that embed the 4 corners. Without a slide to go through that with you, I wouldn't want to go into too much detail, but that's how we would tend to deliver our programs alongside and working with our players, of course, in order to support their football understanding and their football development.
Fab. And then Albert's asked, do you connect with district teams alongside the grassroots clubs?
We do. However, we would tend to speak more to grassroots clubs and to national teams. We tend not to work very closely with district teams. To be honest with you, we don't have loads of players that actually play within the district programme. As unfortunately with one of the rules at this current moment in time, it actually means that if you're to play district football, you would miss RTC or academy football of that weekend, which is one in every 4 weeks. So a lot of our players opt out of that opportunity. We do have one or two that still do it, of course, but we don't tend to work with the district clubs on that, unfortunately.
There's nothing else in the box at the minute. So, every time I say that. A couple more now. So, there's been a question of do you watch or send people to watch Surrey Premier League matches? Now, I'm assuming that's in the girls' league setup.
Do we send people to watch those games?
Do you? I think is the question. Yeah, but to that effect, would it depend on players?
Yeah, I think the honest answer would be we don't typically send people to watch many games at all because of the resources that we do or don't have, and that's why we're very reliant on people forthcoming with understanding the quality that the RTC and Academy is currently of, but also we'd love to do a further session around showcasing that quality in order to understand the environment and the culture that we've created. But we don't typically send people to watch games unless we've obviously been told of something along those lines that that's the right thing to do. So the answer is no.
Okie dokie. Nicola's asked, the trials say that there is no under 10s anymore, but your slide still mentions under 10s. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we're transitioning this year from under 10s. So we've had under 10s from this season, and from next season we will run an under 11s, under 12s. We will not run an under 10s, but we'll work closely with our foundation, which is happening in the background, in order to try and create some sort of bespoke program, like I mentioned earlier, in order to bridge that gap. But for next season, we will run an under 11s and an under 10s and look to go to those single year age bands in order for 2024-25 that we're prepared appropriately to make sure that we're at the relevant levels and relevant age groups come that time.
Okie dokie. Again, nothing in the chat box anymore, and I'm conscious of potentially running through questions when maybe we could do a follow-up, as you've just mentioned. So I think what we'll do, if there are any further questions, please email me, and I can work with Dean around any sort of pressing answers. But in an ideal world, with this isn't the last we'll see of you and us. So I think that hopefully we can get that sort of further connection, as you've said, around in person, like we've done previously, in terms of actually seeing people on a pitch at one of these events, which it feels like it's been a while. That would be fab. I'm going to say thank you to everyone for coming tonight, and thank you for the questions. Thank you, Amelia. No, Amelie. Oh no, yeah, I've got that wrong. But thank you very much for sharing your story, and thank you to Dean and Leanne for coming as well. Please feel free to head off into your evenings in the last of what hopefully still is a sunny day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you, girls. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.